The reflection in the mirror was changing. Will stared at it, barely daring to breathe. The dim shapes in the metal were reforming before his eyes into columns and wide open spaces. It wasn't possible, and yet it was happening. The reflection was changing, as if the room the mirror faced was a long ago place, and there was no one to tell him not to come forward and look across the years. There was a lady in the mirror. That was what he saw first, or thought he saw. Then the gold of the candle beside her and the gold of her gleaming hair caught in a single plait that fell over her shoulder and all the way down to her waist. She was writing, illuminated letters on pages with rich color borders and tiny figures fitted into the ornate capitals. Her room was open to the balconied light, with vaulted ceilings and a series of shallow steps that led out, he somehow knew, into the gardens. He had never seen the view before, but inside him was a memory of a green evening scent and the dark movement of trees. He moved closer instinctively to see it better. She stopped writing and turned. She had eyes like his mother. She was looking right at him. He fought the instinct to take a step back. She was coming toward him, her gown unfurling behind her in a train across the floor. He could see the candle she held on its stalk, the bright medallion she wore around her neck. She was coming so close, it was as though they faced one another. He felt suddenly that all that separated them was the distance of an outstretched hand. He thought he must see his own face reflected in each one of her eyes, small as a candle flame, a twinned flicker. Instead, doubled silver and new minted in her eyes, he saw the mirror. All the hairs rose on his arms, the strangeness of it prickling over him. The same mirror. She's looking into the same mirror. That's a quote from Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. This is YA Book Chat, and I'm your host, Leah Stuhler. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of YA Book Chat. Thank you so much for being here and listening. And again, as always, a special thank you to my Patreon members who give money and support every month so that I can keep this podcast going. I really appreciate it. Today, I have another awesome author interview for you guys. I feel like I keep saying this over and over again, but it's because I am so blessed that I get to keep doing these. And I am really, really excited because they've all been fantastic books. So today I am interviewing international best-selling author C.S. Pacat, and we are going to be talking about her brand new book called Dark Rise, which comes out on September 28th. So you guys are actually getting a little sneak peek before it even comes out. Her other books are the Captive Prince series. She also has a graphic novel series called Fence, and she is a USA Today bestselling author, and I'm very excited to have her here. Welcome to the podcast, Kat.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. This was such a fantastic book and a fun read, and so I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Oh my gosh, me too. I can't wait to get started.
Well, why don't you start by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Kat, and I'm an Australian author. I write mostly fantasy. I grew up here in Melbourne, Australia, but I've lived all over the world in various different countries. Probably the two biggest places that I've lived that have influenced me was Italy, where I did university for a little while, and then Japan, where I lived for a few years. And that was way back in the 1990s, in the era of kind of the first explosions of manga into popularity in the West, and Japanese kind of visual kei music or whatever. And all of that stuff became an influence on me in my writing.
I am jealous that you got to do some school time in Italy. My family is Italian. I'm Italian American. I've been to Italy twice and to Sicily, and I absolutely love it. And I've always thought, man, I would love to spend a good chunk of time there and live there for a little bit. It's just, I love it.
Oh, is your family from Sicily? Mine is from Calabria, which is, for those who don't know, the bottom of the boot, the tip of the boot. So just north of Sicily, but still very, very southern.
Yes. My family is from Sicily and also Naples. So we're both split from Bath.
Oh, it's beautiful down there, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I absolutely love it. I was telling my boys the other day about how at the markets, they just have these baskets full of snails, like live snails, and they sell the snails. And my boys didn't believe me. I was like, no, no, it's true because they eat them. And you just walk around and there's just these baskets of snails.
Right. But it's Italy. So the snails are delicious. Absolutely
Yes.
delicious.
Yes. My mother used to tell me stories of her grandfather cooking the snails, and you got to put them in the pot alive and they would try and like crawl out of the pot while he was making them.
Oh, no. Oh, unfortunately, snails are very, very slow. They're not going to outrun the pot, are they?
No, definitely not. Well, I am excited. So we are talking about Dark Rise. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit what it's all about?
Dark Rise is a young adult fantasy novel. I grew up reading Tolkien, and I love these kind of big classic battles between good and evil where the entire fate of a world is at stake. So Dark Rise, I think, is my take on one of these epic battle books. But I wanted to take one of those types of stories and then drastically destabilize it so that by the end, the reader is kind of white knuckling it, like, oh my God, what is going to happen? And so hopefully I'll be giving readers, I guess, a story that they think they're familiar with, but then gets completely turned on its head.
I would definitely say that you were very successful in that route. I mean, throughout the whole book, like you cannot, some books when you're reading them, even, YA fantasy, you can kind of figure out where it's going to go. Maybe if you're really lucky, you figure out, I mean, not that I want to, but, sometimes people figure out the big twist or whatever. But with this book, I had no idea what was coming until it hit me. And so it was crazy. But I loved it though. Like I loved all of the crazy twists and turns. And then at the end, and don't worry, everybody, we're not going to spoil anything. Okay.
We won't spoil the end.
No, I mean, the book hasn't even come out yet. So, but at the end, there, you think you've got everything figured out and you know what's going to happen. And then there's like these two, not just one, but two really big bombshell revelations right at the end. And I was like, what just happened? I thought, what? So you definitely succeeded in that. And I wanted to ask you, okay, when you started writing the book, did you know that was how it was going to end? Or did it kind of develop as we were writing it? Because that was definitely like crazy big two bombshells at the end of the story.
Yes. So I did know how the book was going to end before I started. In fact, the ending of the book was, I guess, my starting place idea when I began writing the book. I think it's, if you had to say what kind of structure is the book, like that kind of structure is often known as a revelation plot, where there's some kind of revelation that happens at the end that backlights the book that you've been reading up until that point. I think like probably the most famous and most successful example of a revelation plot is maybe The Sixth Sense, the movie by M. Night Shyamalan, who my friend refers to as M. Night Shenanigans.
I love that.
But yeah, it's good. Yeah, so I knew how it was going to end when I started out. And then the challenge was setting up that ending so that it would land with maximum impact. But I'm definitely a writer that plots things out beforehand. I need to know where everything is going. Otherwise, the whole process is just too terrifying.
Yeah, I could imagine. I'm the same way. I'm a very organized person. I have to I'm a list maker, so I have to know my point A to point B. And so if I were, writing young adult fantasy, which that will never happen, but I would definitely be like a plotter. I have to have everything out. I'd probably have this huge whiteboards and cork boards in my office and all kinds of notes all over the place.
Yes, you've just exactly described my office. That's exactly what it's like. There's tons of there's usually a ton of research and then a ton of notes, and then I think it became famous as the conspiracy board meme. There's a wall with lots of notes and bits of string connecting pieces of paper. But yeah, that's the process. It's much more like dressage than I know a lot of other authors kind of like to just get on a wild bronco and just see where it takes them.
Yes.
But I like to get on a well-trained horse and then take it exactly where I'd like it to go.
It's a good route. I'm telling you, it's a good way to go. But yeah, the ending definitely has that big impact that you were looking for. So successful job there. So in the book, we have the character of the stewards. Okay. This group who, they're supposed to be the good and protecting everybody from this dark magic and this danger. When I was reading it, they kind of reminded me of like the medieval Knights Templar. Was the creation of the stewards influenced by the Knights Templar or by another order of knights? Did you kind of do any research involving these particular characters?
Yeah. So in Dark Rise, the idea is that like a long, long ago, there was a magical world that there was a terrible war, and that kind of world ended and then was forgotten and lost to history. But now in the present day, the heroes and villains of that war are being reborn. The only people that remember the old world are the stewards, who kind of, their job is to remember and to stand guard in case any of the dark forces of that old world try and rise again. So I think when I started to make them, I had in my mind, I guess the Knights Templar or the Arthurian Knights, and a grand order of knights. But I've always also really liked the image of like the lonely guardian, the one whose job it is to watch over and remember, even ranging from kind of classical variations of that night all the way through to kind of schlock movie versions like the Guardian in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. There's something really poignant to me about someone who is the only one who holds a lost knowledge. So I did do a ton of research. The first foray that I did was into not knights, but actually monastic orders in Europe in the 1400s, just seeing like how they lived in closed communities and what with a purpose, in their case religious, but in my case a fantastical purpose, but how that purpose ordered their life, what kind of rituals they would do, what kind of like a daily life might be like, the interesting regulation that they had, where a lot of monastic orders, for example, they'd get up at the same times every day. They'd wake up at 4 a.m. To say a prayer and then fall asleep and then wake back up at 6 a.m. and say another prayer, and so on and so forth. So I found all of that fascinating, and I started to think about, what kind of lives and rituals might a magical order of knights have. But yeah, and then of course there was like a lot of military research as well, because these are fighting stewards. So a lot of research into kind of like siege castles, siege weaponry, fighting styles, and so on.
Very nice. I definitely, when you were talking about the image of a guardian, before you even said it, my head also went to Indiana Jones.
Yeah, that's exactly. Such a powerful image though, isn't it? Of that,
it is.
That one, like the lonely guy in the cave, he's drained of all color. He's kind of, he's got his weary, lonely purpose.
Yes.
And he's just waiting for someone else to kind of come and take up the mantle, but they don't over hundreds of years. It's very intriguing to me.
Yeah, I love it. I've always kind of been fascinated by these old world style, monastic orders, and like the Knights Templar too. I mean, I watched a whole TV show on it, so multiple TV shows. But and I do love too, like how you were talking about the different rituals that they have. There is one ritual that they do in the book, which I won't say what it is, so as not to spoil it, because it ends up becoming a big revelation. Again, I was like, okay, I did not see that one coming either. So I loved that you just took what seemed like a very simplistic ritual that they would do all the time, which makes a lot of sense. Like what you're saying, they have these things that they do all the time, these different orders, but then you turned it into this like bigger, surprising aspect of it at the end too.
Right. It's like, but why do they do this? What is the hidden meaning behind these rituals? And what is the real purpose behind everything that's going on? Yeah.
Yeah, I love getting the hidden meaning behind things in stories like this, because sometimes I read books and there are things that happen and I'm like, but why? Why do they do that? I don't understand. I want to understand, but they never, like, you never go back to it and you don't find out why. So I love getting like the backstory and the why behind it too. So it was just, another strong, fun point for me, and that I really enjoyed it. So I love to, so the characters in this book are fantastic. We've got Will and Violet, the two sisters. We've got all the stewards. Violet was probably one of my favorite though. We really
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, she was just so fantastic. Like, I just loved the female empowerment that we see through her. She's very strong physically, but she also becomes very strong, like emotionally and mentally as the story moves on. And she kind of like really goes on a journey of self-discovery. She finds out who she is and what her true strength is, both physically and otherwise. So talk to me about creating her character. Did you set out to have her be kind of like an example for adolescent girls to believe in themselves, or is that just kind of how she wound up?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you passionate about writing or just love the arts? Tune in to the Poetry Podcast with A. Discover the latest trends in the industry, enjoy insightful book reviews, participate in Q&As, listen to captivating poetry readings, and get inspired by author interviews. We release episodes on the first 3 Thursdays of each month. Don't miss out. Come check us out at the Poetry Podcast with A.
I didn't necessarily set out with that intention in mind, but it's interesting that you connected with Violet, because prior to Dark Rise, I'm kind of known for writing these all male worlds, these all male environments. My first series was a gay romance, and then my graphic novel series, Fence, is set in an all boys school. And so I got very used to a kind, what I would call a kind of like almost masculinist structure, where a hero who's usually a guy just starts off in his ordinary world, and then he gets the famous call to adventure and enters this world of an adventure. And when I started to write Dark Rise, I was reading a lot of YA, a genre I really love, and I was really noticing that a lot of YA has a very strong kind of romance plot that will run through the YA novel, with the result that when the girl kind of crosses the threshold into the new world's often a guy, or it's symbolized by a guy, or she's there to meet a guy. Yeah. It did have a very different feel in terms of what the adventure offered. Like, oh, your adventure in life is going to be a guy. And that can be really exciting and wonderful, particularly in the romance genre. That's why I read romance and love the genre. But because Dark Rise is such a I'm attempting to write an epic adventure story, and I wanted there to be a girl there who's there to be a hero in the adventure. Like, that's her role. She's not really there to be in a romance plotline. Her storyline is very purely heroic. And to be honest, I was nervous writing that, because you get a lot of messaging in YA that the book needs a romance, especially for the girl. It's not that she might not have romance be part of her life, but it just doesn't, I guess, define her journey through the story. But yeah, it was lots of fun to write, and she's one of my favorite characters as well. So I'm so happy that you connected with her.
Definitely. I loved seeing her in that hero position. I thought it was great. And I was actually really glad that there wasn't a romance element for her, because in the whole book, there's not really a huge romance element. There's like a tiny little hint of something,
there's a hint of something to come. There's something on the horizon.
Yes. But I, for me at least, when I read these kind of fantasy like adventure books, like I don't care if there's not a romance in it, because for me, like, that's not the point of the story. Like I am like you, I'll take a good romance any day, of course. But for stories like these, the fantasy stories and the adventure, I just love it for that aspect, and seeing each character be their own hero. Like, I am that person who was really mad when Peter Jackson made the Hobbit movies and threw in an extra character who wasn't in the books just because he wanted a romance. And I was like, no, you just killed it. It's the Hobbit. It doesn't need a romance. Stop it, Peter Jackson.
Are you referring to friend zone Legolas? Because that was honestly just one of the most terrible things I've ever seen in my screen. I just didn't need to see Legolas be in the friend zone. It's not my conceptualization of that character at all.
No. Well, and then in The Hobbit, he throws in Evangeline Lilly's character, who is not in the book at all. He just put her in there so she could have a relationship with one of the dwarves. And I was like, anyway, I was like, that's pointless. That is pointless.
I think I agree with you. That really frustrated me. And I think I would have liked her character. I've got no objection to kind of adding or strengthening female characters in that storyline, but I found myself really wishing that, he just made her a general in the army, or like a commander, or a something, some storyline for her that was not only romance based.
Right. Take a note out of Tolkien's book where he makes Éowyn the one who kills the stinking Dark Lord. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Best moment ever in that entire book series.
Yeah, that is quite amazing. But yes, I felt the same way. It's interesting. When I was trying to write Dark Rise, so it does have a hero's journey structure, which is similar to the Lord of the Rings or Star Wars and so Harry Potter. And I couldn't help but notice how a lot of those classic heroes' journeys kind of resist a romance. When the romance does appear in them, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know if I like that. Like in Harry Potter or Matrix, or it's just kind of like, oh, that's not why I necessarily signed up for this particular adventure.
Exactly. It just doesn't feel like it fits. So that's, one reason, like, I loved this, because Violet is her own like strong character, and she is a hero, and it's great. And there's not that romance aspect to get in the way of that. Okay. So we have our villain, Simon, who I also love. He's like such a fantastically dark and awesome villain. But one thing that was really fun for me is that he's very mysterious, because we hear about him through the other characters, and we meet his kind of right-hand man, his sidekick, and we get to know him, but we don't really see Simon until a lot later in the book. Right. So was he, I'm guessing, I would imagine you did that intentionally to keep mystery behind Simon. Was that intentional?
Yeah, I always love I always love villains. And part of writing Dark Rise is it's like my love letter to villains. I'm queer. I grew up in the 90s when pretty much the only queer characters you ever saw on screen were villains. For example, every Disney villain.
True.
From like Ursula, Jafar, Scar.
True.
They're all coded queer.
Yes.
And my experience was that it kind of didn't work on me, which is that, like, instead of it making me hate myself or hate being queer, it just made me love villains. And I sort of noticed that like a lot of the really kind of great, some of my favorite sci-fi and fantasy is really defined by its villain, often to the point that it's even named after its villain, like Alien or the Terminator.
Yes.
And in a lot of those classic series, you don't see the villain immediately. The villain's withheld. They're just a sense of menace or an idea or a concept. I think Spielberg in Jaws, famously, they didn't have the budget to show the shark until a few shots at the end, with the result that you just kind of have the building fear of the shark without ever seeing it. And I rewatched recently Jurassic Park, and I saw that like 15 years later, Spielberg had used the same technique. We don't even, I hadn't remembered this, but we don't even really see the dinosaurs until about halfway to 2/3 of the way into that film. They go to look at the T-Rex and that he's not even appearing in his enclosure. And they're kind of like, oh, this is a drag. Can't even look at the T-Rex. But the result is that a sense of menace builds. And so that was something I really wanted to capture in Dark Rise. So we hear about Simon, we see his effects, and we see kind of the arms of Simon in his minions or the people that work for him, but we don't meet Simon himself until much later on.
And the same thing happens with the even bigger villain, the Dark King, which is like he's even more mysterious and out there. And so it's great. I love it. You know who also, as you were talking about movies, as you mentioned him earlier, M. Night Shenanigans. I'm just going to call him that now. He's also really good at that, because I don't know if you've seen the movie Signs, which is the alien one, but like you don't see the aliens till like the very end of the movie, and which makes it even worse. Like the whole movie, I was like, those aliens are going to be like hideous and like scare the crap out of me, and you don't even see them to the end. Like I love that. Just the big build up to it. It just makes it, the impact of it when you finally get there, all the more powerful.
Agreed. And like so often the unknown is more frightening than the known. As soon as you see something, you can start to strategize around it, figure it out. Like it feels like something that could be defeated, but something in its absence just always looms over the mind much more significantly. Yeah,
for sure. So Dark Rise, like we've kind of talked about, it's a very like classic story of, dark versus light, and we've got the good and evil and the magic in there. And it takes us on a journey that's set up in a way so that the reader is not really sure who's going to end up victorious until the very end, because there are so many twists and turns, and the dark side of the magic is so very dark, with all of these little like, I can't say, but all of these things that happen. So tell me about any challenges you might have faced in writing this type of like classic good versus evil, dark versus light kind of story.
I think my touchstone was definitely Lord of the Rings. So I grew up reading Tolkien, and I loved that book so much. I would read it at least once a year growing up. After the films came out, I kind of stopped doing that. I couldn't say why. I did love the films. And then around that time as well, I think Lord of the Rings kind of went out of fashion a little bit. People started to think of it as simplistic or old-fashioned. I reread it again as I was preparing to write Dark Rise, and just marveled anew with an appreciation of Tolkien's craft, his ability to create fantasy elements that become iconic, just start to feel as though, well, there's always been an elf. We all know what an elf is. We all know that dwarves live in the mountains.
Yes.
And we all sort of just feel like, of course, the Eye of Sauron is a thing that just exists in our consciousness.
And big, gigantic spiders.
Yeah, right. Big, gigantic spiders. Exactly. And so I also became aware that when there are a lot of writers that took on Tolkien, and sometimes I either succeeded in what they were doing or ended up feeling like a little bit derivative in tone. And the writer that I felt like had been most successful in taking on Tolkien, commercially successful, was George R. R. Martin with Game of Thrones. And he did it by looking at what Tolkien had built, which was this kind of bucolic pastoral view of the medieval period where, you know, heroes win the day and good triumphs over evil. And, you know, the problem with a bad king is that he's a bad king, but he'll be defeated by a good king. No one's overthrowing the monarchy in Tolkien. And thought like, oh, what if I step into the space that Tolkien doesn't occupy? Like, what if the medieval period was like dark and brutal? And so I think, like, for me, the biggest challenge was stepping into that space and thinking, what hasn't been done here? Where are the empty spaces that I can, and for me, it began with, because one of the things I think that is old-fashioned about Tolkien is that sort of biological determinism where, you know, an orc will always be bad and an elf will always be good. And I thought, like, but what if an orc could also be a hero? You know, what if an elf could betray you? Suddenly everything seemed a lot more alive and interesting and potentially full of story when I started to think about it like that. But you kind of have to set up a simple structure of good versus evil before you can start playing around with it. That was the challenge for me.
Yeah. And without giving anything away, I could tell that, like, that's, I mean, kind of, you know, what happened because of the way that it ends with our main characters. It's definitely like the opposite. It definitely goes, it has that great, like, good versus evil story, but then it does end up in a way that a typical one doesn't. And so it's very exciting and enthralling. And I think it's great.
I always, speaking of Game of Thrones, I think like a really formative moment for me in terms of influence on me as a writer was the moment in Game of Thrones where George R. R. Martin kills the death of Ned Stark in book 1 of Game of Thrones, because you really believe Ned Stark is the hero of that story up until that moment. And then killing him is so off script that suddenly there's this almost euphoric rush of excitement of the unknown. Like, what on earth can happen now? You've killed Ned Stark.
Yes.
Who's going to be the hero of this story? And I found that moment just so creatively and narratively exciting, because it took a classic story structure and then just flipped it on its head. And I think then when the reader kind of thinks they know what they've signed up for, but then something even more shocking happens, that was a space that I really wanted to attempt to write into myself.
Yeah. And you definitely did that. I was shocked at the end for sure. I was like, yeah, I definitely didn't see it going that way, but it was in a like really good way, because it changed the way that I thought, you know, changed the way that I think about a typical or classic, you know, like good versus evil kind of story, and who's the hero and who's not. And, you know, like you said, do elves always have to be good or evil, one or the other? Do dwarves have to be a certain way? So it's fun to explore the other side of those and come out and see what happens.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting, you know, again, we're talking about Tolkien, and the whole thrust of Lord of the Rings is that even the most unlikeliest person can be a hero, which is like this mere hobbit, you know. But yet that figure of the young boy hero is our dominant cultural image of a hero that we've iterated on over and over and over and over and over and over again over decades. And so, you know, I'm also, you know, I love heroism. I don't find heroism itself to be old-fashioned, but I'm fascinated in. I think it does appear where you least expect it, and it's not necessarily the person that you think is going to step up in a time of great difficulty that will be heroic. So that was also something that I wanted to explore. Maybe you're watching one person, but maybe heroism is going to appear where you least expect it.
Yes. And it does. And I love it. That's why I love Violet, but we did. So we did talk about her a little bit, but also with like Will and Catherine and even a little bit of Elizabeth too, though we don't get her as much, but just a little bit that we do get of her and all of them. I feel like with each of them, there's kind of like a theme of self-discovery because they all kind of discover new things about themselves as the story progresses along, and they develop and they change quite a bit. And I feel like, that's something that so many adolescents experience as they go through middle school and high school. So I was just kind of wondering if you could tell me a little bit, what it was like creating the characters and their journeys that they go through. I know you kind of mentioned Violet earlier, but was she your favorite, or were any of the other characters your favorite?
Well, I can't choose a favorite. I guess they always say it's like a parent choosing a favorite.
True.
I think the characters that I most enjoy writing are often villains or difficult characters. So I like writing characters who are disruptive because something exciting is always going to happen when they're on page, and they're going to draw interesting reactions out of other characters. So for me, the two characters that embody that quality, which is James and Elizabeth. James, because he is, I guess he's the lieutenant of the Dark King.
Yes.
And he's very, how can I describe him? Disruptive. He likes to get under people's skin.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Elizabeth, she's a young girl. There's a description of her in the book that she's like a stump in the road blocking your way. She's a character that kind of cuts to the heart of what's going on, often in the most disruptive way. Yeah, so I also found her scenes very alive, and her very fun to write. Catherine, she's a girl whose desire for a good match in life leads her into the heart of danger. And I guess she, at least at the beginning of the book, starts off life as quite a limited seeming character. She's raised to believe that she has to secure a marriage with her looks. And she's because she's very attractive, she's quite happy with a value system that places looks at the top because she's successful within that system. But hopefully as the story goes on, you kind of realize like she's very trapped in that world. And if not for that world trapping her, perhaps she too has the potential to be more than meets the eye. But whether she's given that chance or not is, I guess, a dramatic question of the book. But I have, I can also enjoy writing characters with quite extreme limitations because they can also be fun to write. So she was fun in that sense. Will, the main character, well, he's my first love, I guess. The whole book flows from him. He's the concept of this book. And I don't know how much I can even really say about
I know.
But I like unlikely heroes. I'll say that much.
Yes, that's a good way to describe that and to say that.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just thinking as we were talking about this, because for me, when I was reading this, while it was full of adventure and excitement and, oh my gosh, did that just happen? I did also have a moment or two that did make me a little teary-eyed. Did you cry at all while writing this? Does that happen to you when you write it at all? Like, I know
it does happen to me when I write. Yes.
Did you cry?
And it did actually happen twice in this book, but I'd be, I guess, again, we can't talk spoilers, but I'd be so curious to hear which parts had you tearing up. One of the parts that had me tearing up, I guess I can talk about, is towards the end of the book. And it's actually not necessarily a sad scene. It's like a heroic moment for Violet, but I just found myself so in her moment of heroism that I cried a little bit as I was writing it. And then
I can tell
what
you.
I say something towards the middle of the book as well.
Yeah.
Also made me tear up.
I have to tell you.
I cried twice writing Dark Rise. Okay. And in the entire Captive Prince trilogy, I only cried once writing that series.
Interesting. I feel like okay, I don't know how to say this, but I feel like in a good way, you know, authors put us readers through so many different emotions, like, which I absolutely love, absorbing each one of those emotions that I feel when I read. And I always am like, sometimes it's like, I want to throw the book against the wall because it's making me so mad because something's happening. And then there's also these, like, I'm sobbing moments. And so I feel like it makes me feel a little bit better if I know that the author was just as upset when they were writing it as it makes me reading it.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. But the funny thing is, as the author, you can't necessarily trust your own feelings when you're having them while writing. So it's not that, like, the fact that you're feeling something very strongly doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transfer onto the page. Like, if you think about, you know, maybe when, if I think about when I was, you know, 12 or 13, having a lot of feelings and writing a poem. It's not that the poem, you know, that when I look back at the poem, I'm like, well, that wasn't a very good poem. But I certainly felt a lot of feelings while I was writing it. But it's like your own feelings will not necessarily always lead you to the best artistic outcome. So even when you're like sniffling away as you're typing, you can't trust that it's going to be communicated.
Well, I'll tell you after we're done recording what my moments were.
Thanks.
Well, is there anything else about Dark Rise that you would like my listeners to know? Anything maybe we didn't touch on you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think the thing that I want to say about it is, you know, my favorite books growing up were the ones that took me on a journey, took me to an imaginative place that I never thought that I would go, really took me somewhere I could have never gone myself. And Dark Rise is a book that I've been working on for like about almost 10 years of world building before I started to write manuscripts.
Wow.
And it's really taken me on a journey as the writer. And so I guess I would like to say to any potential readers out there that I just really hope that I can take them on that journey with me, and that I hope they'll enjoy the book.
If they're anything like me, they're going to love it because I enjoyed it very much, you guys. So you should all just go buy it and read it because it's fantastic. And it is an amazing journey. And I absolutely loved it all the way through, start to finish. There was not one moment where I was like, you know, like sometimes that does happen. But I'm telling you, like with this book, like I was always like, I need to read more. I need to read more. I need to read more. And now, you know, so it's one of those books that keeps you up late at night reading, which is good because you just don't want to put it down. Well, I would love it if you want to tell everybody a little bit about your other books. You've got the Captive print series and then the Fence graphic novels too.
Yeah, well, so Fence is a series of graphic novels. That is my love letter to my favorite anime genre, which is the sports anime. I absolutely love. So the first sports anime I ever watched was Hikaru no Go, which is about the board game Go. So it's like it should be like on paper, it should just be absolutely the most boring series. Just watching a young boy playing Go for like 70 episodes, but it's completely riveting. And I watched that series, ran out, bought the manga. Was teaching myself Japanese as I was trying to read this manga that hadn't yet been translated back in those days. And then, you know, that genre has since taken off. There's shows like Yuri on Ice, which is about ice skating, or Haikyuu, which is about volleyball. I just love the competitiveness, the camaraderie. I used to fence when I was in high school. And
nice.
And it's just such a beautiful looking sport. It's really aesthetic. But I think, and maybe in the aesthetics, what gets lost is that, you know, it's also an individual combat sport. Like this is one-on-one combat with another person. There's a lot of intense rivalries and feelings that enter onto the strip, you know, when you're fencing. So I thought, like, what an amazing, it wasn't a sport that I'd seen given a sports series treatment before. And so I leapt at the chance to write a comic that was about fencing. So it's set in an all-boys school, and it follows like an unlikely hero as he kind of climbs the ranks in the world of fencing with all of his, I guess there's a rivals to romance plotline that threads through there as well.
Nice.
And that is a young adult series. Captive
Very
Prince
cool.
is very, very adult. That's probably the first thing that I should say about it.
Oh boy.
This is an adult romance. It's I guess its point of interest is that it's marketed as a different genre in pretty much every country that it's published in. I think in the US it's published under a romance imprint, and it was the first kind of big commercial gay romance under a romance imprint that was published in America.
Okay.
But it's a fantasy series, so it's about two princes. Well, it's about a prince. I guess you can guess from the title Captive Prince what happens to him. He's taken captive to the court of a prince of a rival kingdom. And there's an enemies to lovers romance that springs up between our two heroes in that series.
Very fun. I love that. I just thought I wanted to ask you this too about Dark Rise. Okay, so the ending, like it seems like it's a firm ending, but it also kind of seems like there's a little bit of room there. Is this a standalone, or is there going to be more? Is it a series?
It's a planned trilogy, so there are two
Yes!
more books coming in the series. Yeah.
Yay, that makes me so happy. Okay, good. You've just made my day.
So to be continued.
Yay! Oh, that's
Dark
so
Rise.
exciting. I am ready to, well, I mean, it's going to be a while, I'll have to find some other stuff to read in the meantime, but I'm glad to know we'll be coming back to this world. That is very exciting. Very good.
The story is only getting started.
Oh, that is so exciting. And see, everybody listening, you could tell by my reaction how excited I just got there. That means that you really need to go read this book because it's that good. Okay. Well, why don't you tell everybody where they can follow you on social media, maybe your website, and then I'll be sure to post all of that in the show notes for today too, so everybody can find it easily.
So you guys can find me at cspacat.com. That's my website. I'm cspacat on Twitter, and c.s.pacat on Instagram. Looking forward to seeing you guys all online.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today, Kat. This was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed talking about it. And again, Dark Rise comes out on September 28th. So everybody needs to make sure they go and grab a copy of it.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so much fun.
Of course. And thank you everybody for listening, and we will chat again soon. Today's episode featured the book Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. I'd like to say a special thank you to Lauren at HarperCollins for setting up this interview. And of course, a special thank you to C.S. Pacat herself for coming on YA Book Chat today. Be sure to follow YA Book Chat on Instagram to stay updated on all the latest news. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get your episodes as soon as they are available. And have you checked out the YA Book Chat Patreon yet? You should. There are lots of bonuses and fun perks for members. Check the link in today's show notes for more information. YA Book Chat was created by, is hosted and edited by me, Leah Stuhler.